Imagine opening an old book and finding a sentence that seems to have been written specifically for today. Something so direct, so serious and so frightening that it makes anyone stop and think, is this already happening? Now, imagine that this phrase came from someone known for seeing far beyond what their eyes could see. Someone who dedicated their entire life to caring for people, guiding those who suffered, and warning about dangers that many ignored. That someone was Padre Pio, and one of the strongest warnings he left was about what happens when a government tries to live without God, without values, and without moral boundaries. And here's the first shock. This warning wasn't symbolic or vague. It was a warning based on what he was seeing. Countries that expelled faith, silenced churches, ridiculed spirituality, and then plunged into deep crises. History clearly shows this. And this is where the powerful hook comes in. What if the world today is repeating those exact same steps without realizing it? Think about it. Every time a government has decided to remove God from the center, it wasn't just religion that weakened. Morality collapsed, freedom shrank, violence grew, and people began to feel an emptiness that nothing could fill. Padre Pio knew this wasn't a coincidence, it was a consequence. He said that when a country completely rejects God, there's no empty space left. There's room for something much worse to enter. And now comes the question that will guide the entire video. Are we experiencing the same scenario that Padre Pio feared? Are old signs returning, even if many people pretend not to see them? Get ready, because from this point on, you will understand why this warning has spanned decades and why it may be more relevant today than ever. Let's discover together what Padre Pio's warning about godless governments really means and why it matters so much to all of us. When Padre Pio spoke about governments that tried to exist without God, he wasn't being poetic, nor was he exaggerating to frighten anyone. He was describing something he could already see very clearly: the dangerous course a society takes when it completely abandons its spiritual values. For him, the problem wasn't just religious. It was human. Padre Pio observed how people changed when they set aside what gave meaning to life: faith, morality, the ability to distinguish right from wrong. And this also applied to governments, because in the end, people govern. The first point he always warned about was simple to understand, even for a child. If you turn off the light in a room, darkness immediately follows. And it's the same with a country. When you remove God, you remove values, you remove limits. Some other force occupies that space, and it's rarely something good. What's most impressive is that Padre Pio said this not as someone who imagines, but as someone who sees. He lived in a time marked by wars, dictatorships, conflicts, and revolutions. He witnessed the rise of regimes that removed God from the center and minutes later began to stifle freedom, control people, and spread suffering. He knew what happened when a government believed itself to be its own God. And here's a hook that grabs you. What if he was seeing signs that are still happening today? Father Pio feared that governments without God would create a world without compassion and without responsibility, where people would be treated as numbers and not as lives. He said that without God, morality ceased to be a path and became merely an opinion. And when that happens, each leader makes their own rules, and this opens enormous doors for abuse. The most shocking thing is that he never presented this warning in anger. On the contrary, it was a warning from someone who wanted to protect, from someone who knew that a country without faith is not lost all at once, but little by little, until no one notices. Therefore, understanding this first sign is essential, because everything starts here. When a government thinks it can live without God, something greater begins to be lost, and history has proven this many times. Want to understand how this evolves? Then follow me to the next point. When we talk about governments without God, many people think it's just a distant idea or merely a religious opinion, but it's not. History itself shows with very clear facts what happens when a government decides to completely remove God, values and spiritual principles from its path. Padre Pio observed this happening with his own eyes. He lived in a time when several countries began to believe they could replace faith with ideologies, as if the state alone could fill the place of good, morality and truth. And the result of this was not long in coming. To put it simply, imagine a school where the principal removes all the rules because he thinks they're disruptive. At first, it seems like freedom, but then it turns into chaos, confusion, and injustice. Now imagine that in an entire country. That's exactly what several 20th century governments did when they removed God from the center, and everything went downhill. Padre Pio saw this and was deeply concerned. In some places, such as the former Soviet Union, churches were closed, religious people were persecuted, and any form of faith was prohibited. In other regions, such as under Mao's regime in China, religion was treated as an enemy of the state. And what do these nations have in common? They all plunged into enormous human crises, millions of deaths, famine, censorship, fear and suffering that continue to leave deep marks on history. Father Pio didn't need to invent anything. He simply observed what was already happening and asked the question that still shocks people today. How can a government take good care of its people if it rejects the values that protect human beings themselves? For him, when the state tries to become the new God, the result is always the same. Power grows, freedom shrinks, and people are treated like cogs in a machine. And here's the point that draws attention. Padre Pio wasn't saying this to attack anyone, but to warn them. He knew that history was showing a pattern, and that ignoring this pattern would mean repeating the same mistakes. That's why understanding these real-life examples is so important. They aren't just old pages. They are signs that can still teach us a lot about today's world. When Padre Pio spoke about governments that were turning away from God, one of the first signs he pointed out was something that few people immediately notice: control of words. It may seem simple, even innocent, but history shows that many governments began their oppressive regimes by changing how people could speak. And when you control what someone can say, you also control what they can think. To better understand, imagine that someone decides to ban words like truth, faith, or freedom, saying that they are no longer important. Gradually, people stop using them, and when they stop using these words, they begin to forget what they mean. That is exactly what happened in several godless regimes. They knew that if they could change the vocabulary, they would also change reality. Father Pio observed this happening in different parts of the world. In some places, religious terms were erased from books, schools, and even everyday conversations. In others, they were ridiculed, as if believing in God was something shameful or forbidden. This didn't happen by chance. It was a strategy. The less people talked about faith and morality, the weaker they became. And here comes the detail that frightened Padre Pio. When a government tampers with words, it is not merely editing the language. It is erasing identities, memories, traditions, and values. And when these values disappear, society loses its signposts. It becomes easier to manipulate, deceive, and even control an entire population. History clearly demonstrates this. Regimes like Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and other authoritarian governments created dictionaries, slogans, and mandatory expressions, all to replace old words with ideological terms. The goal was simple: to weaken free thought. Father Pio used to say that confusion begins when truth is exchanged for empty words. He knew that without true language, there is no true freedom. And today, looking around, the question that remains is, are we starting to experience something similar, where certain words are forbidden or distorted? When Padre Pio observed the world around him, one of the signs that most concerned him was the silencing of faith. He knew that when a government tries to erase God, it doesn't do it suddenly. It starts slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly. First, it ridicules religion, then it limits it, then it controls it, and finally, it eliminates it. History shows this pattern with frightening clarity. To understand this in a simple way, imagine there is a bright light in a room. Instead of someone turning off the light all at once, they put a blanket over it, then another, until the light disappears without anyone noticing the exact moment when everything went dark. That's how many governments have acted. They didn't destroy faith overnight. They gradually covered it up, stifled it, diminished it. Father Pio lived in a period filled with regimes that attempted to silence temples, churches, and any religious expression. In the former Soviet Union, crosses were removed, Bibles burned, churches transformed into warehouses or empty buildings. In Mao's China, priests and nuns were imprisoned, people were forbidden from praying in public, and any sign of faith was treated as a threat. In Albania, believing in God officially became a crime. All of this is not legend, it is real history recorded and documented. And why did this happen? Because governments without God understood that faith made people strong. Those who believe in something greater do not easily bow to power. They do not accept injustice in silence. They do not allow themselves to be manipulated. Therefore, silencing faith was a way to weaken the people. Padre Pio said that when a government tries to silence faith, it is not religion that is being attacked. It is the very soul of society. He knew that a nation without spiritual freedom would eventually lose freedom in all other areas as well, and he feared that this would happen again in places that seemingly were safe. The most curious thing is that the silencing of faith isn't always direct. Sometimes it comes disguised as modernity, progress, or adaptation. First they say that praying is outdated, then they say that religion is a hindrance, and when people finally realize it, they've already lost one of their most important pillars. Padre Pio's warning wasn't just for the past. It serves to open our eyes to the present. And the question remains, are we seeing, once again, signs of this silencing happening around us? When Padre Pio spoke about godless governments, he always emphasized something that anyone can easily understand. Without values, everything falls apart. He didn't say this as a moral or religious judgment, but as someone who observed reality with impressive clarity. For him, morality was like the foundation of a house. If that foundation weakens, the house may stand for a while, but eventually it collapses. And when it collapses, it takes everything with it. History confirms exactly that. Many governments that have decided to eliminate God have also eliminated the idea of right and wrong based on eternal values. Instead, they have defined morality according to their own political convenience. And when right becomes merely an opinion and not a principle, the rules begin to change according to the interests of those in power. To understand this in a simple way, imagine a board game where the leader decides to change the rules every time they are losing. At first, people even try to play, but then they realize there is no justice, no direction, no trust. And when no one believes in the rules anymore, the game ends in chaos. This is what happened in many real countries when they abandoned spiritual values. Corruption increased, violence grew, families split apart, and the entire society lost its inner compass. Father Pio looked at these examples and said something profound. When man distances himself from God, he approaches emptiness. This emptiness is dangerous because it needs to be filled by something, and often it is filled by ego, power, greed, and manipulation. In various godless regimes, leaders began to see themselves as possessors of the truth. They manipulated laws, controlled the media, justified injustices, and demanded blind obedience. Without values, any absurdity seemed acceptable. And what's most frightening is that a lack of morality doesn't destroy a society all at once. It acts like a crack, It grows slowly, silently, until everything implodes. Padre Pio feared exactly that. He knew that when morality disappears, people begin to act as if anything is permitted, as long as no one is watching. And when an entire nation lives like that, justice loses its power, the innocent suffer, and the powerful do as they please. Today, looking at behaviors spreading around the world, relativism, irresponsibility, ethical confusion, normalization of evil, it's impossible not to recall Padre Pio's warning. He knew that a society without God may seem modern, advanced, and free, but inside it is crumbling, like a wall that appears firm but is hollow inside. When Padre Pio spoke about governments without God, one of the points that most worried him was the inevitable path that this type of government seemed to follow, the chase. And he wasn't saying this as someone imagining a distant future, but as someone who lived precisely during the time when some of the worst regimes in history decided to expel God and soon after persecute those who believed in him. To understand this simply, imagine a brightly burning bonfire bringing light and warmth. Now imagine someone trying to extinguish that bonfire at any cost. First they blow on it, then throw water, then throw sand, until only smoke remains. Many governments have done exactly that with faith. They started by criticizing, then limiting, then prohibiting, and finally punishing those who insisted on believing. History is full of real-life examples. In the Soviet Union, priests were taken to secret prisons, churches were reduced to ruins, and any demonstration of faith could result in punishment. In Maoist China, religious symbols were destroyed, and millions of people were persecuted for not abandoning their beliefs. In Pol Pot's Cambodia, any religious object, even a rosary, could condemn someone. In other countries, the persecution was not so explicit, but it was equally cruel. Constant ridicule, social pressure, fear of speaking, fear of praying, fear of believing. It was as if faith were treated as an invisible crime. Father Pio observed all this with sadness and concern. He said that when a government expels God, it doesn't empty society, it delivers it to forces that have no compassion, no limits. And persecution arises precisely from this void. The government begins to see faith as a threat, because faith gives strength to the people. A person who believes in something greater doesn't bow down so easily, doesn't allow themselves to be manipulated, doesn't accept injustice blindly. That's why godless regimes have always tried to silence those who believed. And here's something any child can understand. When someone fears the truth, they try to silence those who speak the truth. That's exactly what Padre Pio saw repeating itself. He feared that if the world forgot this historical pattern, it would end up falling back into the same darkness. And looking at today's signs, subtle censorship, attacks on faith, irony against those who believe, he would probably say that this warning has never been more relevant. Padre Pio always said that one of the most dangerous signs of a government without God was inversion of values. And this is something so simple to understand that even a child can see it. When the world begins to applaud what is wrong and criticize what is right, something very serious is happening. History shows that in various regimes that extinguished faith, this inversion was not just a detail, it was the fuel that accelerated moral and social collapse. And Padre Pio saw this as one of the first symptoms that society was losing its soul. To better understand, imagine you have a compass. It always points north, right? Now imagine someone deliberately changes the compass, making it point in the wrong directions. You would try to follow the path, but you would end up lost. That's exactly what happens when values are reversed. When what once represented honesty, kindness, respect, and justice is ridiculed, and what was always seen as unjust, cruel, or selfish becomes normal. The moral compass breaks, and the whole world gets lost along with it. Father Pio saw this spreading through godless governments. In some places, working for the common good came to be seen as weakness. Kindness became a laughingstock. pride replaced humility. Lies became a tool of power. Human life lost value, treated as mere statistics. And when good loses ground, evil enters uninvited. The scariest thing is that this shift in values doesn't happen all at once. It starts slowly, as if it were something harmless. First they say that there is no right or wrong, then that everyone does what they want, then that truth is relative. And when people wake up, they are already accepting behaviors they would never have tolerated before. It's like boiling water with a frog inside. It doesn't realize the danger until it's too late. Father Pio said that this process is one of the greatest spiritual traps, because when right becomes wrong and wrong becomes right, the people lose discernment. And a people without discernment is easily manipulated. What once shocked now amuses. What once inspired now disturbs. What once protected is now attacked. He feared that entire societies would adopt distorted values as if they were normal. And when we look at the world today, where moral confusion grows, where truth is distorted, where virtues are exchanged for appearances, it is impossible not to remember this warning. Padre Pio knew that the exchange of values is always the beginning of something bigger and much more dangerous. Father Pio always said that when a government tries to expel God, it needs to attack something very specific immediately afterward: the family. That's because the family is like the root of a tree. If the root is strong, the tree withstands winds, storms, and even attacks. But if the root weakens, a single breath is enough to bring everything down. And history proves that godless regimes always try to strike at the hearts of families first, not because they want to modernize society, but because they know that strong families create strong people. Strong people don't let themselves be dominated. To understand this clearly, imagine a table with 4 legs. Family is exactly that. It supports, balances, protects, and guides. Now imagine someone starts sawing off one of the table legs, then another and another. At first no one notices, but when they look again, the table is wobbly, unstable, ready to fall. Many governments that have expelled God have done exactly that. They didn't destroy families directly, but gradually weakening their values, ridiculing the figure of parents, destroying traditions, encouraging divisions, and devaluing everything that once united people. Father Pio knew that a society without God also becomes a society without roots. He said that when faith fades within a family, something much greater is lost: the sense of belonging, of direction, of purpose. The family ceases to be a place of protection and becomes merely a group of people living under the same roof without deep bonds. And when this happens, people become more vulnerable to external influences that are not always good. History provides clear examples. In various authoritarian regimes, children were encouraged to see the state as more important than their parents. In some countries, they were taken to schools where they learned to obey the government even before learning about faith, respect, or love. In others, parents were punished for raising their children according to their spiritual values. All of this had one objective: to break the strength of the family and transform it into something weak, divided, and easily manipulated. Father Pio saw this as one of the most dangerous signs. He said that when the family loses its spiritual foundation, everything around it begins to crumble. Education becomes confused, relationships become fragile, society becomes a cold place, and people become lonely, even when surrounded by others. He feared a world where parents and children no longer spoke the same moral language, where bonds were replaced by screens, and where family love was substituted for fleeting distractions. And when we look at the world today, increasingly divided families, children growing up without role models, fragile relationships, homes lacking dialogue, it's impossible not to remember this warning. Padre Pio knew that a Society without God doesn't fall suddenly. It falls first within homes. Father Pio knew that when a government decides to live without God, the first impact is spiritual, the second is moral, but the third, and perhaps the most painful, is human. He saw this repeatedly throughout history. When spiritual values disappear, it is not only faith, not only churches, not only morality that suffers. It is the people who truly suffer, ordinary people, fathers, mothers, children, the elderly, people who only wanted to live in peace, but who ended up being swallowed up by systems that have completely lost their sense of humanity. To understand this easily, imagine a castle made of several large stones. Faith is one stone, morality is another, family is another. Now imagine that someone decides to remove these stones because they think they are unnecessary. At first, the castle even remains standing, but little by little, it begins to crack. And those inside, the people, are the ones who are in the greatest danger when everything starts to fall apart. That is exactly what happened in many countries that expelled God. The castle collapsed, and the people were left under the rubble. History shows this with cruel clarity. When godless governments seized power, famine, economic crises, misery, fear, and violence followed. In the Soviet Union, millions died of starvation because political decisions placed ideology above human life. In China, entire families were destroyed by campaigns of persecution. In Pol Pot's Cambodia, even children were treated as enemies of the state. And all this happened because when God is removed, the value of life is also removed. Father Pio always said that the suffering of the people does not begin with bombs, prisons, or soldiers. It begins when leaders cease to see human beings as the image of God and begin to see them as pieces, numbers, instruments, or obstacles. Without God, everything becomes negotiable, even dignity. He saw this with a heavy heart because he knew that spirituality protects not only souls, but also lives. And what's most frightening is that this suffering isn't always explicit. Sometimes it begins silently, in the increase of loneliness, the growth of violence, the lack of hope, the feeling of emptiness that spreads among people. Many societies that have turned away from God have experienced exactly this, a type of emotional and moral pain that doesn't appear in the headlines, but that destroys lives from within. Father Pio feared seeing this pattern repeating itself in the modern world. He saw signs of increasing dehumanization, of people treated as disposable, of values trampled by self-interest. That is why his warning was so urgent. Governments without God don't just create cold societies. They create a wounded people. Padre Pio had a very clear vision about something that most people ignored. History doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in circles. He saw that when a society turned away from God, the pattern always repeated itself. First came the loss of morality, then the weakening of families, next the silencing of faith, the inversion of values, persecution, and finally, the suffering of the people. For him, it wasn't necessary to be a prophet to understand this. It was enough to observe what had already happened in the world. And what frightened him was realizing that this cycle always seemed to return, as if humanity insisted on not learning from its own mistakes to understand. This simply, imagine a child touching a hot pan. They feel pain and learn the lesson. Now imagine that years later, another child does the same thing because they didn't hear the story or thought it would be different for them. That's exactly how Padre Pio saw governments without God, like children repeating a painful mistake, thinking it won't happen to me. But it does. It always happens. History is full of countries that quickly descended into the same moral and human abyss when they decided to erase God from public life. Father Pio looked at these examples and saw patterns that many preferred to ignore. He saw that authoritarian regimes always began with promises of progress, order, or freedom. But without God, these promises turned into control, fear, and suffering. He said that evil is clever. It never arrives announcing who it is. It arrives disguised, and when people realize it, they are already trapped within the cycle. What is most striking is that Padre Pio also saw signs that this cycle could return in new eras. Even decades after the fall of authoritarian regimes, he warned that humanity remained vulnerable to the same temptations. Absolute power, pride, moral relativism, and rejection of faith. He feared that the modern world, more proud and more confused than ever, could fall into the same cycle, only with different clothes and more sophisticated discourse. And here's the point that anyone, even a child, can understand. If you make the same choices, you will get the same results. Father Pio saw that many governments and societies were repeating the exact same decisions as the countries that had fallen before. Faith was ridiculed. Morality was relativized. The family was weakened. Truth was distorted. And good was increasingly forgotten. For him, this was like watching a movie you've seen many times and knowing exactly how it ends. That's why he insisted so much on this warning. Not out of fear, but out of love. He knew that if the world didn't recognize this pattern, it would end up entering the same cycle of confusion, suffering, and darkness that has hurt humanity so many times before. Father Pio had a gaze that transcended time. He saw not only what was happening before him, but also what could happen in the future if humanity continued to ignore the signs that history had already made very clear. He said that the modern world, with all its technology, speed, and appearance of progress, risked repeating the same mistakes of the godless regimes of the past, only in a much more subtle, much more silent, and therefore much more dangerous way. And this is the part that is most striking. Sometimes danger doesn't appear as an enemy, but as something new. To understand this easily, imagine a tree that begins to dry out. The leaves fall, the branches become weak, but the root is still alive. Someone looking from afar might think the tree is fine because they only see the surface. But someone looking closely realizes that it is losing its strength from within. That is exactly how Padre Pio saw the current world. A world that seems modern and full of light on the outside, but which, inside, is beginning to lose essential values. And that is the first sign that something is wrong. He observed behaviors that had already appeared before the fall of many godless regimes. Faith being ridiculed, morality becoming a subject of debate, the family being weakened, truth being replaced by opinions, and people becoming increasingly empty, even surrounded by comfort. For him, this combination was a huge warning. He knew that a society that loses its spiritual roots also ends up losing its ability to distinguish good from evil. And when that happens, any strong voice can become a leader, even if it is leading everyone to the abyss. What's most frightening is the similarity between the past and the present. Today we see discourses criticizing old values as if they were obstacles to progress. We see people afraid to express their faith. We see families increasingly divided and children growing up without solid role models. We see governments trying to control narratives, limit opinions, and even decide what people can or cannot believe. All of this has happened before, and it has always ended the same way, with suffering, confusion, and loss of freedom. Padre Pio didn't say these things to create fear, but to awaken attention. He wanted people to understand that the future is not something that simply happens. It is built by the choices we make today. He asked, how can a world prosper if it abandons the very foundation that sustains it? It was a simple but profound question, and today it resonates even more strongly. Because looking around, it's hard to deny. The modern world is beginning to repeat what we've already seen, but now with a smile on its face and packaged as progress. And the question remains, are we prepared to recognize these signs before it's too late? Father Pio had a very particular way of warning people. He didn't use complicated words or long speeches. He asked questions, and questions have enormous power. They echo in the mind, make us think, disturb us, awaken our conscience. One of the questions he repeated most often was simple, direct, and profoundly frightening. Who is ruling when God is not? This seemingly small phrase carries a giant warning. For Padre Pio, where God is not present, another force always takes its place, and this force is not always good. To understand this, imagine that the light in a room goes out. The darkness doesn't need permission to enter, it simply occupies the space. And in the soul of a country, it's the same thing. When spiritual values disappear, when morality is ignored, when faith is ridiculed, when the family is weakened, when truth is distorted, some kind of darkness fills that void. It's not a physical darkness, it's a moral, emotional, and spiritual darkness. Padre Pio saw this clearly because he had lived through moments when this darkness took over entire nations. He asked, if God doesn't guide a government's decisions, who does? Is it power for power's sake? Is it the ego of leaders? Is it the ambition for control? Is it fear? Is it lies? He knew that the absence of God does not mean neutrality, it means vulnerability. A government without faith may even seem just at first, but when faced with crisis, pressure, or temptation, lacking solid values, it falls. And when it falls, it drags the people down with it. This type of reflection resonated with people because it wasn't just about politics. It was about us, about how our individual choices shape the spiritual climate of the place where we live. Padre Pio said that a country isn't lost overnight. First, it loses respect. Then, it loses truth. Then, it loses freedom. And finally, it loses itself. All this because little by little God is left aside, and when we realize it, we're already too far away. His question was like a flashlight pointed inside each person. What do you believe in? What do you stand for? What do you allow? Because he knew that godless governments don't begin at the top. They begin in every little heart that decides that faith doesn't matter, that morality is relative, that everything is permitted, that nothing is sacred. And when many think like that, the whole society changes. What's most striking is that this question still makes sense today, perhaps even more so than when he asked it. In a world full of confusion, conflict, lies, and inversions, Padre Pio's question appears as an invitation to reflection. What kind of future are we building when we remove God from our choices? This question is the crux of the matter, and the answer rests with each of us. When we reach the end of this warning, it's impossible not to feel a weight in our hearts. Padre Pio didn't leave these words to cause fear or confusion. He left them because he loved people and knew that history has a harsh way of teaching lessons. When faith is withdrawn, when values are forgotten, when truth is distorted, and when the family is weakened, the whole of society suffers. He didn't want the world to repeat the mistakes of the past, those he witnessed so closely, with wars, persecutions, forced silence and suffering that marked entire generations. For Padre Pio, this warning was like a lighthouse in the midst of a storm, calling people back to the light before darkness took over. He said that each generation faces its own challenges, but that they all share the same temptation to believe they can build a future without God. That is the root of everything. A government without God doesn't just create cold laws. It creates an environment where human life loses its value, where morality becomes a bargaining chip, where power replaces compassion. The people don't suffer because God abandons the country. They suffer because the country abandons God. And history has shown countless times that this path always leads to the same destination: confusion, emptiness, and pain. But here's the point that makes all the difference. Padre Pio's warning is not an announcement of defeat. It is a call to responsibility. He wanted each person to understand that faith is not just a spiritual detail. It is what prevents the world from crumbling from within. He knew that strong societies are built by strong individuals, and strong individuals are guided by the light of faith, truth, and values that do not change, according to the will of those in power. And now, After understanding this entire journey, from the loss of values to the suffering of the people, an inevitable question arises. Is the world repeating these signs? And most importantly, what do you believe should be done? This is a point where you become part of the story, not as a spectator, but as someone who thinks, who sees, who reflects, and who chooses. Therefore, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe we are experiencing part of this? Warning today, which of these signs do you see most clearly in today's world? Leave your comment. Your perspective can help others reflect as well. And before you leave, don't forget, subscribe to the channel to access more in-depth content like this. Leave a like and share so that more people understand the value of this much-needed warning. Your participation makes all the difference. Until the next video.
Hear the true prophetic message.